inflation is down. What does that mean for our mortgages?
Well, I hope, morning, Kay, I hope it's good news because it's very close to its target level now. It's returned to much more normal levels. And the Bank of England, who decide these things independently, once they're confident that it has reached its target level and it's going to stay there, they can start to bring down interest rates. That would obviously be good news for mortgage holders. But I think families will still be feeling quite bruised after the last couple of years because although the inflation rate has gone down, prices are still higher than they were a year ago. I think for them, the optimism is what the International Monetary Fund said yesterday, which is they're predicting our economy will grow over the next 6 years faster than France, Germany, Italy or Japan. So they said the UK is in a good place going forward, and I think people will draw some encouragement from that.
They also said that we need 3 rate cuts by the end of the year. The markets originally were looking at a 50% chance of that happening in June. They've now reduced that to 15%. So they are not quite as optimistic as you are.
Well, I think it's, I have to be careful, as you know, in not predicting when the Bank of England are going to do this because they decide these things independently. But I think the mood music for bank is that they do feel that we've turned a corner on inflation, and the Bank of England governor is confident that we will move into cuts in interest rates. But the precise timing is obviously something that we'll all have to wait for.
Isn't it the case that the government's actually contributed to higher inflation through putting up taxes on things like tobacco and paying increases in public sector pay, 9.8% on a national living wage as well?
Well, that's not what the managing director of the IMF said yesterday. She said that the reason that inflation had fallen and growth was going up was because of combined action by the Bank of England and the government, myself and Rishi Sunak. And probably the most important thing that we had to do was that very difficult autumn statement in 2022, when we had to take very difficult decisions on tax and spend. That showed that we got our public finances under control, and that meant that the path for bringing down inflation was much, much smoother.
The Bank of England, you quoted the IMF there, the Bank of England did say that the national insurance cuts were slightly inflationary, so you will at least accept that that is what the Bank of England is saying.
Well, lots of people say lots of things, but the people that we look at most closely are the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility, who formally go through all of my budgets and autumn statements, and they assessed both the budget and the autumn statement, and they said that the impact was not inflationary. And we're really careful, obviously, at a time like this to make sure that we don't take decisions that are inflationary.
OK, the IMF says it was a bad move as well. So the Bank of England say it was slightly inflationary. The IMF says it was a bad move. But you're clinging on to what the IBR said on this particular instance.
Well, let me address that head on. So I do think, and Conservative governments think, if we look around the world, that the fastest growing economies in North America and Asia are ones where tax levels are lower, and that Europe mainly has lower growth rates, partly because taxes are higher. So it's really important for families to try and bring down taxes when we've been going through all these cost of living pressures. But it's actually very important for growing the economy. And in an election year, I think that is the big choice between Labour and the Conservatives. Labour, I think Rachel Reeves did a lecture for a whole hour, 8,500 words. She didn't mention bringing down the tax burden once. Conservative governments are prepared to do the hard work to bring down taxes. Yes, sometimes we have to put them up when you have a pandemic or an energy shock and we want to support families. That's the right thing to do. But we think that should be temporary. That is a really big choice going forward in terms of how successful our economy is going to be.
Yeah, you talk about families, hardworking families, how they've been struggling. I mean, looking at these figures, they are good. They're not as good as some might have hoped, hence the fact that the interest rates may not come down next month as predicted initially. But our Ed Conway has one of his clever charts that he was showing with us that showed that we are spending 20% more than we were 2 years ago. We're 20% worse off than we were 2 years ago. How would you like to explain that to my viewers this morning?
I haven't seen that chart. I don't think I would have said we're 20% worse off than we were 2 years ago. But actually, if you look at what's happened to living standards since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, the OBR were predicting the biggest fall in living standards ever. And in fact, they've risen. And that is partly because we gave about £3,000 of help to the average family, paying for half people's electricity bills and so on. And we thought that was the right thing to do. And that's one of the reasons why the IMF said yesterday that we are going to have a soft landing. That is to say, we managed to get inflation down from over 11% to more normal levels without having to put the country into a really deep recession. And I think that is really important. But I think if Ed is saying that prices are higher than they were 2 years ago, that's right. And what really matters is what's happened to wages to compensate for that.
20% higher, Chancellor. Actually, in 2021, cost of living is 20% higher than in 2021.
Yes. So then that's the prices you pay. I'm trying to imagine what that graph says because I can't see it and I haven't seen it. But I imagine if you're saying prices are 20% higher, then what's happened to wages? And wages for the last 10 months have been going up faster than prices. So people's real disposable income has been going up. But yes, you're right. You know, when you have a pandemic and an energy shock, it does have a big impact. And, you know, they've actually had a bigger fall in living standards in places like Germany and Sweden. But because of the very difficult decisions we've taken, you know, people like the IMF say that the UK economy is now in a good place. And even if it feels tough now, going forward, we have reason to be optimistic.
2 quick questions. Why has the government been able to organise the payouts for infected blood victims but not for sub-postmasters yet?
Well, we're trying to do both as quickly as we can, and there are processes that you have to go through. And all I would say is that there is no block from the Treasury saying, slow this down because we don't want to pay the money out. We want to get it out as quickly as we can. We need to know it's going to the right people. It's taxpayers' money, so we have to make sure that we have proper processes in place. But in the case of the infected blood scandal, which I'm probably closer to because I was Health Secretary for nearly 6 years and I met a number of the individuals involved, this is an absolutely appalling scandal and we will pay what it takes. And we haven't put a limit on how much it costs. We want to follow the inquiry's recommendations.
And finally, Ireland, Spain, Norway, all recognising the state of Palestine. Will the UK government be following suit?
Well, we have a long-standing position on this that we will be prepared to recognise the state of Palestine at the time that it most helps the peace process, and we will continue to keep that under review. That's not now, then? It's not right now, but you know we will continue to keep that under review. But you know but our position is that this is not the right time to do it at the moment.